Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Downey. He's a consulting forester and the developer of Forest Metrix. Donn, how are you doing today?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's good to see you. We were just joking in the preamble there that you and I, with COVID, we haven't traveled as much as we normally would, and we're enjoying it. I was saying I don't think I'm going to make my Star Alliance Gold status. I don't care. Not interested in traveling as much, but maybe to start things off, how have you been, and how's the last few years have been for you since we haven't seen each other in several years?
Indeed, yeah, yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been busy. It's been busy in good ways. I think the pandemic certainly took a toll on traveling, but at the same time, the online connections really seem to ramp up. People really seem to be exploiting these technologies and not afraid to really connect that way. So honestly, it's been a bit of a blessing for me. I mean, travel has always been part of what you had to do. So having COVID giving you excuse to not have to travel, it's been a little tough to kind of get back into that. So for better and worse, obviously mostly for worse in terms of COVID, but as far as work-life balance and not having to travel as much, it's not the end of the world. So anyway, it's really good though. I mean, our core product continues to evolve. We have a lot of we have a good following, so we're in a good place as far as the last time we saw each other was several years ago, and the product really has continued to evolve to the point where we're at a maturity level where we don't have to be pounding the pavement quite so hard.
Nice.
It's like we're there. We're no longer really introducing ourselves to new people. We're really kind of building the existing relationships and working on that momentum. So it's most people know who we are now, or at least folks who are kind of in our niche market anyway.
Well, we're going to expand it. So with this podcast, believe it or not, there's people from everywhere, from Japan to Korea to New Zealand to Hawaii. Maybe someone needs to invite me to do a podcast in Hawaii. I'd happily do that. I break the travel rule for that one.
Right, right.
But in terms of Forest Metrix, 11 years and 11 months, according to LinkedIn. And so you're coming on 12 years. So congratulations on that. But before we maybe talk about that, I was curious to maybe learn about your journey, because I believe there was a bachelor's many moons ago in environmental studies, and then a master's in conservation biology. But how the heck did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, it has been a circuitous path. I didn't discover forestry until late in life, relatively. Unlike most of my peers who went through a bachelor's of forestry. That's it's not an industry that people usually break into midlife. But I had my bachelor's in economics and environmental science, and went and I was really into the ski industry, and I wanted to run a ski resort, and I got a job as a ski area planner. So for a few years I was basically designing ski resorts and doing environmental and market analysis and stuff. Quickly discovered that was more of an office job than I was hoping. It's not as fun as it sounds. As I started a building company. I grew up building. My father was a builder, home builder. And so I started a design build company, did that for a decade or so, and finally just realized that I was really much more interested in the wood and the woods than I was in the construction side of things. Always spent all my life in the woods, from a knee high to a grasshopper running around in the woods, and that's really where my heart was. And I discovered, like, the wood that I love building, I really love growing the trees. And so I kind of developed or discovered this passion I had for trees and growing trees and being in a forested ecosystem. So I went back to school. I had a friend who was a forester, a couple friends at the time. As an adult learner, it's kind of tough to you can't just go back and get a bachelor's, at least not without yeah. So I found a master's program in conservation biology where I was really able to just replicate a pretty conventional forestry education. So that was in 2011 or 12. And it was while I was in my master's program that I set out to become a consulting forester. That's what I wanted to do. And I was in my program and kind of thinking about, oh, well, how do I want to set up my business? How am I going to actually do this job? I've always been kind of systems and process oriented, like how does something work, and I'm looking at how I can be efficient and looking at what was available at the time for really software for consultants, for small shops who need to run up inventory data. And it just the options at the time weren't all that compelling in terms of, as you well know, you've been in it for a long time. You've seen huge change in terms of the technology that people are using. And at the time, it was pretty archaic stuff, pretty kind of old school and hard to really adopt, and certainly not very accessible. So I was one of my friends at the time was in database development, and I was telling him how this is what I'm doing now, and I said, yeah, and I really need to collect this data. I need to run some math on it. And he said, well, geez, why don't we just make an app? I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Computer guys. Sure enough, like a day later, he's like, what? How about this? And he had something mocked up on an iPhone. Back when the iPhones were like this big. And it just kind of started from there. It was 2012, and we just started bouncing ideas back and forth. So I didn't even have my degree, and we kind of started building this just for fun. I quickly discovered that there was a need for this, and the development seemed possible. We're Forest Metrix. It's a database program. It's not coded from the ground up. It runs in FileMaker, which is a database environment. So we were able to kind of rapidly deploy something that was really quite sophisticated without a bench of 15 programmers and a 7-figure budget,
Yep.
And through that, I basically said, well, geez, this is great. I want to be a consulting forester and kind of take care of my 200 or 300 clients and help them grow healthier forests, or I could help 200 or 300 of my consulting forester colleagues do the same for their 200 or 300 clients. And it just seemed like a way to have kind of a wider impact and kind of sharing what we were learning. And I met so many people that were in my shoes, and it just seemed like there was a real hole in the market. So yeah, we ended up kind of starting Forest Metrix, and I had to shelve the consulting forestry career for a few years. Once Forest Metrix, by like 2017, 18, it was pretty mature. I was able to really focus back in the woods, and then for the past few years have kind of basically just played in both worlds. So anyway, it was an odd trajectory, but it was worth it. It had to be done in order to put those pieces together.
Yeah, amazing to hear. I didn't know you had that design build side of things, because most of the guys I know that start that design build, they kind of stay in it because they're hooked on building and doing all this cool stuff. So it's fascinating to hear you decided early on saying, you know what, I'm going to go be a consulting forester, and then ended up building the tools that a consulting forester would use, and maybe taking another detour. Sounds like a great detour, right, to get to where you are now.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, like you're based in Vermont, I think, or is it Maine?
Yeah, central Vermont, right on the border of New Hampshire,
Very
Connecticut, River Valley. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. So maybe for our audience, maybe tell us about the business of forestry in your neck of the woods in that Vermont, Maine. I know there's been some ups, downs, but what's the world look like today?
Well, that's a good question, and it's interesting because of how that affected the trajectory of the company in terms of, forestry is so hyper locally specific in terms of how people are doing things that, when we start building a program, we say, oh, this is really awesome. It's perfect. Well, it's perfect for like 5% of foresters. And then you go down to Pennsylvania and you say, oh, geez, they do regen evaluation this way. And then you get down to, the further you get from home, the more different things get. So the product that was originally built, it was using this inventory tally method that was I can't even remember the name of it right now. Some old DOS program that just happened to be the standard in this very particular region with this very particular cohort of foresters. And we just thought that was it, oh, we're like, this is forestry. Well, no, there's, one of 12 ways to do it. So for those first couple of years, it was very much like kind of building by the seat of your pants, building additional capabilities to accommodate the 150 different ways people are doing things. So in New England, we're very much, it's a hardwood market. It's hardwood, saw logs is what drives the business, and white pine. Spruce fir to a lesser extent. That's more kind of like northern New Hampshire, Maine. We're kind of in the central part of the state where we get down into, your kind of Adirondacks, Green Mountains, Whites, down into Massachusetts and beyond. A lot of northern hardwood. So not much pulp to speak of. I mean, in the past decade or 15 years, we know what's happened to most of the mills. So our low value market continues to decline, and it just puts all the more emphasis on just growing high grade lumber. I mean, that's ultimately, as consultants, that's what we're trying to do, is grow trees of more value. Of course, 50 years ago in Maine, that was easy when you're just sending, matchsticks to the pulp mill. But now it's much more deliberate. It really takes intention. So that's our market. We're working with anywhere from 50 to, I think our largest client is about 8,000 acres. Most average about 250 acres, or figure 100 hectare or 100 Canadian acres. That's pretty much our average land holding. So it's a lot of, mid-size sales, where you're selling, 500,000 board feet, million board feet, or smaller, 100,000 board feet. And you're really playing the markets in terms of, is the pine hitting just right? Is oak moving? It's a real dance. It's tough in some ways, particularly as our lands are getting so fragmented around here. You have landowners that have 40 acres and they want to manage it. And it's, the economies of scale, just aren't there. Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with in our, pretty much Vermont, New Hampshire. It's of course not unusual. It's not unique. But that was the what's the word? That was the lens through which I first viewed forestry. We don't really have plantation style forestry like in the South or in the Lake States, and certainly nothing like the Northwest.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So thinking of Forest Metrix, very cool story and journey, and again, we've known each other for years, and even like these are new stories for me, so I find the stories just absolutely fascinating and learning more about your journey. So thinking of Forest Metrix, maybe for our audience who aren't in your niche and other regions of North America or even abroad. What's the target? What's the ideal customer profile for you, and what are the values? What am I buying? I'm Joe Forster or Jane Forster, and I'm coming to you and say, all right, what's your software do, and what am I going to get out of it? What's the pitch for Forest Metrix and the Forest Metrix Pro software? Because I think you have a couple different editions last time I checked, and catering to different needs.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way you phrase that question is you kind of hit on something, in that you kind of said, what's your target forester? It's not really what's our target company. It's the foresters that come to us are folks looking for an easy, as in simple to learn solution. And that doesn't necessarily just mean consultants. Like, we have this really funny band of clients where we have a couple exceptionally large state agencies, right down to a lot of, one-man consulting firms. And the reason for that is they're all sectors. I mean, we have Weyerhaeuser uses our product in one of their outfits. State of Wisconsin has 180 foresters, Mississippi Forestry Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the reason is, whoever the audience is, they're trying to deploy a solution that's simple for their audience to pick up. and that's kind of always been our shtick is we want to make something that people can just pick up, look at it, and within a fairly reasonable time horizon, be able to just go cruise. When we developed this, the some of the expectations at the time were that you would pay for hours or even days or weeks of training that you would pay for in order to learn how to use the software. And to us, that model just seemed absurd. It's like, well, why don't we just make it easier so people don't have to invest 2 weeks to learn it? So that ethos is what kind of gave us this name and this reputation as software that's really powerful, but you can just pick it up and go. You don't need to be super technical. And we kind of brought it to hardware, iPhones, iPads that people are used to using. So it's kind of in that environment that people are really accustomed to. So we just kind of used a lot of the design guidelines and a lot of the kind of the features that people are used to seeing, but it's the hyper specific forestry tools. It just happens to be in the most ubiquitous device in the world right now, the iPhone.
For sure, for sure. Now if we go back to that time, we still we're gonna date ourselves, but we still had the clamshell phones or even the good old Nokia one. So again, we're dating ourselves, but it's a different time. So thinking of when you're building this, what were maybe some of the I call them speed bumps, and I'm not asking this question in the context of focusing on a negative, as opposed to, I believe with any technology transfer, if that's the right word,
Yeah.
there's a consistent maybe set of speed bumps, such as this is how we've always done it, Don, so why would I change? Or can this thing work in like minus whatever, Fahrenheit? And so, yeah, of course it'll work there. Or will it last the 8 hour shift I'm on, right? And you're kind of giggling, you're thinking back. But in the early days, as you're bringing this technology to market, what were some of those things you had to maybe confront and kind of work and get people's thinking to over that fence, if you will, to realize that there is a better way to cruise and using your software?
Yeah, so it's funny, it has changed in some ways. It's changed quite a bit, and in other ways it's not changed at all. The ways that it's changed quite a bit is, so when we launched, like the first versions of Forest Metrix, this was before the iPad mini. So it was originally designed for the iPhone, which back then the iPhones were like the size of a business card, you know, and we were about halfway through developing those prototypes, and I was out, using with it and cruising with it, and we got word that the iPad mini was coming out. It was October of 2012, and this amazing device, oh, I just have one right here that you could
I
fit
have one behind me as well.
right, that you could fit in your hand. And this was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is, so if this hadn't come out, we probably wouldn't have been able to get the acceptance that we did, because the older phones were just too tiny. They just weren't all that compelling. But at the time, it's 2012, so this thing just comes out. It basically looks to most people like a piece of glass, which it really is. And we're telling people, oh, take this into the woods. It's great. You'll be fine. Of course, we were pretty much right, but it was a pretty hard sell, back in 2012, convincing people that they didn't really need something that they were used to bring around, the brick, the 3 pound thing that they'd say, oh, well, I just throw it in the back of my truck and I go, and it's like, well, why are you throwing it in the back of your truck? It was this whole mindset was really bizarre of like, well, I want to just be able to beat up this hardware. And it's been years since we've had to have that conversation. It really took probably 5 years. It was probably 2017, 18, where we just stopped hearing as much of that. And I think to a certain extent, there are certainly people that do need those devices. And I'm looking at you, Pacific Northwest, where it's raining all the time. Like that's the big thing is, rain, they're not as good in the rain. And I, don't make any excuses for that. But for the most part, people are realizing, geez, I have this with me all the time. I can use it. But the pace at which we were having those discussions back in 2012, 13, 14 was insane. Like you would have thought that we were, I can't even think of a good metaphor, but it was ridiculous how much resistance we had. Of course, once people accepted the idea, I mean, the growth that we saw in those first few years, it was clear that the need was there, that we were filling this need that was being represented in the industry. So in the beginning, yes, it was a lot of questions about, can I use this in the woods? Obviously, we've kind of gotten past that, where, I mean, we have large state agencies and large private companies deploying these by the hundreds and thousands, really, in severe environments. So that we've gotten past. Some things we haven't. Platform has always been a challenge for us because we are only iOS, not by choice. It's not like a strategic decision that we made, but we built in FileMaker desktop software. FileMaker works in Windows, Mac, Linux, and iOS. It does not work in Android. And if it did, we would be, marketing to those devices, which would be great. But it's simply a limitation of the platform on which we're developing. So that comes up every now and again. But even then, like we're seeing, state agencies just issuing iPhones to all of their employees. So even that, the platform discussion has been muted a bit. It hasn't gone away entirely, but it's certainly much less of an issue than it used to be.
For sure, for sure. And I remember back in those days, the Apple products are almost viewed as premium, if you will, shiny. And then
Yeah.
nowadays, you look at an Android tablet, you can have some of those that are more expensive than some of the basic iPads, right? That are coming in. So definitely interesting there. Well, that negates my question of asking what the split in users are across platforms, since it's iOS and that's the piece. So thinking of me, Joe Forrester, I'm coming. I'm like, all right, Don, I got to cruise. I got to do a cruise tomorrow. I got to go. It's like, walk me through that flow if I'm your customer, and is it as simple as, hey man, go to the Apple App Store, download it. I'll give you some credentials or something, and so foolproof that you're off to the races? Or is there, a library of thousands of Don Downey YouTube self-help videos that you subscribe to and watch? And what's the world look like from an onboarding point of view?
Right, right. So for the first couple of years, it was very high touch. It was, everything, you were setting people up individually, using Zoom or GoToMeeting back then before Zoom became ubiquitous. And it was very high touch. It was, we set you up remotely. We're walking you through. We're, helping you get set up. It might have been a couple-hour investment over a period of meetings. But during that time, over the hyper development, 2013 to 18, which was when we were learning all these things about what people needed and kind of building in customizations to make it more universal. So in other words, in the beginning, in the first couple of years, we might actually release custom versions, like, oh, this person really needs this very specific thing. And we would just build it and give it to them. But over those few years, it was maturing such that we were just rolling those things into the flagship, kind of instead of having all these forked versions, which, as a developer is a disaster from a strategy standpoint. We kept building things in, and we, by working so closely with so many people, figured out exactly where the bottlenecks were, exactly where the speed bumps were as far as onboarding, and kind of changed the program to not meet those expectations, to respond to those learnings. As in, we would see where people struggled, and we would say, well, let's make that part of the program easier. And it got to the point where in 2018, we released what we called the Forest Metrix Pro version, which is kind of the structure that we work in now, where you can download it from our website and it actually walks you through the setup. You open it up and it says, hi, thanks for downloading. What are the tree species that you use? And you check some boxes. So that's great. What is the sampling method you use? It's very, I don't want to say interactive, but it's self-guided. So we have people who might contact us, hey, I want to download this. We send them to the download page. They follow the 2 steps. It's not a standalone app because of the whole FileMaker thing that I mentioned. So FileMaker is a free app in the App Store, but then you download Forest Metrix from our website, and that lives and behaves within the FileMaker environment. So it's at the point now, and we'll pretty much starting in 2018, people could just go to our website, install it, download it, set themselves up, and we would never even hear from them. They would just subscribe, and we'd say, "Oh, who's this fellow? Wow, that's nice of them." And the requirement of kind of one-on-one training was completely gone. We have a handful of training videos, maybe 10 or 12, but it's pretty easy. It's a pretty intuitive, simple program that people can watch a half dozen videos that are, 5 minutes, 10 minutes long, shows them through different parts of the program. And then we find that probably 80–90% of people just don't need our help at all. There's a fairly concise manual with a lot of graphics, but it's just, the program kind of runs itself. So that's how it is. And we still have unlimited help and support for life. I mean, you get unlimited one-on-one support. And the reason we're able to get away with that for no extra charge is that it doesn't require a lot of support from us. Like if we were still doing what we were doing 10 years ago, yeah, I'd be doing 200 hours a week, but the program is so refined that it just doesn't require a lot of one-on-one time. So I'll have I'll do some tutorials, and we're obviously happy to spend as much time as people want. We just find many fewer people need that real high level of touch.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. It sounds like, yeah, maybe directly or indirectly from that user experience point of view, kind of nailed it so that it's just, you weren't going to say it, I'll say it, but idiot proof in terms of how you actually interact with the software. It's just self-explanatory. And we both know foresters love that. Simple, just works. Keep it simple, stupid. I hit the button, it does what it's supposed to do. Awesome. Don't need to talk to anyone else. Awesome. I can go do my work in the field. Awesome. And it works and saves me time. Absolutely. So thinking of that, like, sounds very, very cool. And I'm curious to I always say on these podcasts, pick people's brain. And some people have said, like, maybe it's a Canadian saying, I don't know, but I'm going to pick your brain. So looking forward, where we are right now, Sam Altman in the news just got canned from OpenAI. Lots of questions there. Are we generative AI, all this stuff? On one side, when we think about technology, do you see a world where, there's some folks that try and do some of this cruising, via audio? Some folks are, i.e., tree 2, and here's the dBH and X inches height, et cetera, and they're doing audio. Some are trying to, use newer technologies like a backpack ladder with camera and inertial measurement unit. And basically, by the time you walk to the plot center, it's done, and there's a bunch of AI driving. What are your thoughts on that? Because you're kind of describing, Forest Metrix Pro as it's a simple piece of software and yet very powerful because it gets the job done. And I suspect cost effective, and we could, if you want to share, the pricing side of things, the order of magnitude. But what does all this new stuff mean to you? And does it make you nervous, or does it get you up in the morning out of bed and get you excited? But what does all this new stuff coming mean to the business of cruising in general?
Right. I hope it means some significant changes. I mean, I'm not sitting in this chair because I've always wanted to be a software developer. I'm sitting in this chair because I wish somebody else did. You know what I mean? Like I want things to be easier, and to whatever extent that can happen, I'm all for it. I think the two things that I've been really focused on. One is the voice recognition or voice, dictation. So we don't need to be looking at our devices. I think that's a big improvement that should have happened years ago, and we just haven't been able to get there yet in terms of, well, there are some people that are getting close, but it's really not universally acceptable yet, as far as just being able to walk through, say, white pine, 24.5 inches, 48 feet of merchantable height, whatever. And then, and that is something that we have prototypes. We are actually working on that. It's going to happen. It's just, there's some things that we're still working on. But that's got to happen soon. LiDAR is been tremendously frustrating for me, like most people. In fact, it was just a month and a half ago that I was out with a backpack unit demoing it, and I see tremendous promise. And hopefully AI will be able to kind of speed that along, because one of the things that we're really struggling with, or I shouldn't say we, but the industry is really struggling with at the point-based LiDAR side, is species identification. Measuring is easy. Sure, you wave the scanner around. Yeah, there's our measurement. But the species identification, and just as importantly, grade. Like, what we're doing in much of, pretty much most of the hardwood industry in the eastern United States, it's the values all based on grade. And we aren't at the point where the LiDAR processing is sophisticated enough to distinguish that. Is this a number 2 log? Is this a number 3 log? Is it possibly veneer? Because that's where the rubber really hits the road. So I see, if LiDAR could save me time at the plot by having to measure borderline trees, by having to, measure any trees, that would be huge. But the notion that it could just be fully automated and robotic and not require any objectivity of the forester, I'd like to think that's possible, but I think we're a long ways off. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people aren't sure what it means, because it is new, right? You have these LLMs, or these large language models that can pass the MCATs or the LSATs, better than a human, and detect things. And it'll be really interesting to see what the future looks like. And along those lines, no matter which path that goes with the technology, as we started talking, you were mentioning, you're dealing with, the consulting forest, or the one man or woman shop or whatnot. I'm assuming that any of this new technology are going to present themselves as more speed bumps, maybe bigger than saying, hey, I've got an iPhone and this is what it does, right? At least it's a telephone you can relate and go, oh, ET phone home. It's like I can call, versus, hey, I got this 40-pound backpack, and don't worry, it's not going to burn a hole in your brain because it's shooting, millions of pulses of like eye safe, class 1 laser. It's okay, don't trust us. It's okay, right? And going forward. So that's what I'm curious to see how it unfolds in terms of technology transfer and adoption. And that's why I asked earlier to say, are there certain speed bumps? Because I believe, any new technology is going to go through that same life cycle, if you will, of trying to get traction and then go from there. Are there any other technologies that, thinking about you and Forest Metrix, and also your role as a consulting forester, if we were to take everything you've done and maybe do a shift and say, okay, young man here now is looking for the next thing. What's the next thing Donn wants to make easy? Are there areas that you're like, if I was to repeat and focus on another problem to solve for my consulting foresters, or the forest industry in general, are there areas that you're thinking about from a technology point of view that you're like, wow, it's like, this is an obvious one that I can Forest Metrix it to create something new?
There's some decidedly unsexy things. Yes, there's nothing that's all that amazing in terms of, oh, we have the next big thing. One of the things that I'm working on, and this is just like how Forest Metrix started. It was, it started as a pretty much a self-serving mission. I wanted to develop something that would work well for me. And where we're at with Forest Metrix is looking at that kind of business management tool for foresters, as in, one of the things, since I get to work with a ton of consultants, they come to us for the inventory. They say, okay, I want to cruise better. And then the next question is, oh, wait, how are you making your maps? And so we're developing, workflows there to help people use, QGIS better. And the other thing is, how do you manage your jobs? How do you manage your business relationships? How do you manage your accounting? And forestry, I mean, for the same reason that Forest Metrics exists, and there's not Google for forestry or like Microsoft Office forestry edition, it's such a tiny niche that it's never really going to be served effectively by a big software provider. So right now, I'm developing a system, basically kind of a business management system for managing forestry specific client relationships, projects, timber sale accounting. It's kind of the tool that I'm using to run my consulting forestry shop. It's where I can sit down and look at my dashboard in the morning and say, oh, these are the 3 management plans that I need to get submitted by this day. And I'm waiting for those proposals to be returned and signed. And I need to enter some load slips on these 2 timber harvests that we have going on and close out payments to the loggers. It's kind of like the business administration tool for a consulting forester. And just like with Forest Metrics, we're fleshing it out now for me and my firm and a couple colleagues that I'm working with. And we'll see, perhaps it'll become something that is kind of, I will never say universally applicable, because that doesn't exist in forestry, but at least universally maybe more acceptable, that others could benefit from. We'll see. These are the kind of things that take a very long time to figure out. But that's something that is a serious need. I mean, you see so many people, as you mentioned, like foresters they love forestry, they love being in the woods. They're not necessarily skilled business people. The business side of things just gets backburnered. They don't want to deal with that. I don't blame them. I don't either, which is why I'm trying to develop a system that reduces the amount of time I'm spending doing the administration side of things. So is it lasers and voice recognition? No. Is it a very necessary function of running an efficient business? Yeah. And ultimately, that's where I'm at, as far as, like, my goal is always just to try and find a way to do something better. And it might involve styrofoam cups and a dowel. It doesn't have to be tech oriented. It's just, there might be a better way of doing something. So my focus, while I'm always intrigued with technology and I like to see how I can use it, ultimately, I'm just trying to save time, and however that's done, be it a technological solution or otherwise.
Yeah, I love it. Saving time. That's the name of the game. And based on that, Don, I'm I'm curious to know, what's the average day look like? Because it sounds like, you get up at 3 in the morning, go to the gym, then run a marathon, and then come home and then do, some software development for 3 hours, and then chef yourself a lunch, and then go out to the bush, do your consulting forester, and then come back, do some yoga, Pilates, and then code some more, and then repeat. But sounds like a pretty busy schedule, no?
Man, that's funny. I don't know if it's just because I live in Vermont or something, that you think that I'm so healthy and ambitious. Um, the I it has been a challenge, I'll tell you that, as far as balancing, because I really, I wear 2 very related but entirely different hats. But I think mostly the success has been based on time management, in terms of scheduling, in terms of blocking out. I will say, on this week, Tuesday and Thursday, I need to be in the field. Monday and Wednesday afternoon, I need to be focused on development, Forest Metrics. Fridays all meetings. It's very much I have my week siloed. And every day I do wake up early. It's not for Pilates, but I do wake up early and I get a lot of work done. Emails. I basically I jam through an hour or two of emails at the start of every day and just keeps the plate clean. Keep that whole zero inbox that people talk about. Like I'm very, I'm pretty disciplined about that. And then it's just a matter of like right now, I can tell you next week exactly where I'm going to be when, and it's just a matter of budgeting time. It's just a matter of budgeting time, and knowing how to delegate to my partners on both sides. For both forestry and Forest Metrix, and just I think the other thing is being reasonable as far as how much one can bite off. I think for the and here, I mean, you're in the same boat. It's like, well, can we do this? Sure. Should we really take this on? Maybe not. You know what I mean? Like trying to be rational about how much bandwidth we all have.
I
And
have $1 million for you, Don. And it's top priority to get these features built in this new
right.
technology, right? And yeah, there's always competing pressures there. So you mentioned some of your partners. So tell me what it's like to work with them, because it's still technology. And I think looking at the website, there's some folks that are maybe digital nomads, but sounds like the bunch of you have kind of mastered the art of maybe asynchronous communication or just better communication to be super productive.
Indeed. I think, again, our development requirements aren't huge because of the environment in which we're programming. So we have a couple people that are kind of specialists in individual, parts of the program. And yeah, one lives in Portugal, one lives in France, a couple live in Vermont. It's such a great way that you can put together a team these days. So we can find just the right people. We have a couple of us who are full time, and then a couple are contracted. So it's pretty easy, frankly, to kind of keep those things organized and make sure everybody's doing what they need to be doing. For the first half dozen years, it was fast and furious. It was nonstop, with several of us. And now we're in a more stable state where it's more surgical improvements and revisions. But it's not, 6 people doing 80-hour weeks with their eyes bleeding in front of a display. And then my partner on the forestry side is basically my mentor from the past decade or so. The fellow whose company it's just the two of us, and he kind of, I have my partners on the software side, and I have my partner on the forestry side, where I'm gleaning a lot of that wisdom and trying to harvest everything I can from his brain before he retires for good.
Yeah. Sounds like the team retreats are probably in France and Portugal. Nothing wrong with Maine or Vermont or the Northeast, but I suspect when you have the reason, you get to or you find a reason to hop to Europe maybe and enjoy some changes
Well,
there.
that's the bummer. I mean, Zoom is so efficient that it's hard to justify. But when I'm sitting there and I'm Zooming with our guy in France, and he's sitting in the back of his, of course, he lives in a Sprinter van, because why not? With the backdrop of a vineyard as the sun's setting, and he's sitting there programming away.
Well, you could solve that. Just show up, and you could be each side of the Sprinter van on your computers on
Right.
Starlink, having the conversation. Pour each other, top each other's glasses off there, and solve that. Oh,
It's a
that's funny.
wonderful,
That's
yeah.
really funny. So I'm curious to know your thoughts. As we shift maybe to broader topics as we think about and the reason I ask is because again, you're in this unique role where you're playing that consulting forester, but you're also a developer or a technologist. And so when we think about climate change, when we think about all the carbon work, carbon markets and whatnot, what does that mean to you? And does that ripple into the technology space as a digital forester, or is it more muted and you're not seeing as much or maybe jumping on the hype with what a bunch of players are doing with remote sensing and carbon and who's
Yeah.
who?
So our role is really focused on the field side of things. You know, that's where we're trying to save time and in the field and dealing with that stuff. And what the carbon discussion, the other ecological services that we're focusing more on, our role in that is to help people collect that data and analyze it easier. So for instance, we're not getting into the remote sensing space, you know, it's just that's not our core competency. We are further developing the field platform to help people collecting the data that they need to ground truth that. There are a lot of programs, in the States where, the Audubon has a program for, forest habitat for the birds. There are state agencies such as Massachusetts right now that in their forest stewardship plans, you have to be evaluating certain carbon and climate related attributes. They're now tallying down woody debris and tallying regeneration more explicitly and noting a lot more features. So the demands that are being placed on the foresters in the field are generally greater. At the same time that we're saving time on the remote side, the demands of the field forester are also increasing in the field. And our role is just to simply help them do that more efficiently, help them compile that data, so they can have room in their head for all of these different programs that they need to be dealing with. Because that's the complaint that I hear mostly from my forestry colleagues is, geez, the state wants us to do this now, and now we have to deal with this. And now I have to be able to analyze this. I don't even know what that is. So our job at Forest Metrix is to try and, provide clarity. Like half the time, like I'm a consulting forester, half the time I'm a forester consultant where I'm like helping other foresters figure out how to do their job easier. So that's where our role is. And it's really, and there are the opportunities for doing that just are growing every year. I mean, with all of the demands that are being placed on the foresters.
For sure, for sure. Love it. Very focused in terms of your product and what it's going to do, and not trying to make it be something else. There's something you said earlier that stuck with me, and it's kind of stuck with me the last 20 or 30 minutes here. And you made a comment saying, you'd love to do different things, and you're in this seat because there's not a developer doing this or building this software for you to make things easier. I'm going to take that and say, touches a bit on the whole talent thing. I think you'd agree in like the forest industry, there's talent shortage, skill set shortage. As you said, even at the start, being a forester is often not something that pops to mind. A lot of people go the environmental studies, science side to start off with, and whatnot. But I'm curious to know, like maybe at I don't think philosophical. Well, maybe it's philosophical, but why do you think there aren't people who are willing to gently nudge you out of your seat and say, Donn, I'm going to take this over? Because a lot of folks talk about, the total addressable market, or the TAM for, forestry software, and it's small, but it's still a significant size that even if you're to take a percentage of that TAM, it's a sizable amount of dollars. So I'm curious to know from your seat, why do you think people, is it the forestry community that is perceived as laggards and not interested in investing in innovation, so that there's not an ecosystem that's created for people to do this? Do you think maybe there's a generational component, because there's like some young people now that they whip out their 2 or 3 phones, or their Pixel Folds or Samsung Folds, like they expect to do things by default? But I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on why, maybe from a technology point of view, there aren't more actors in this space trying to help everyone be more efficient and do things quicker and save people money?
I think ultimately you're right. I mean, theoretically, there is a fair bit of what's the acronym you use, TAM?
Total addressable market. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I believe that when you say it, but forestry is and will forever be a very small niche market with very sophisticated and particular needs. And I'm just afraid that it's always going to be too small, mostly because forest products, the demand is growing worldwide at 6% a year, but forest products are not going to appreciate like AI assets. I mean, ultimately, we're dealing with trees that just grow too slowly. you know like you can't have growth in the market of 25% when your asset is growing at 3. It's just the economist in me just says it's just simply not hot enough to attract serious, and I don't mean serious, I mean huge development. And I think it's just far too niche. I think that what we're doing now, you're in a space that's a bit more, well, much more universally, there's a much higher ceiling for you, because the technology that you're working with is more universally applicable to other industries, other experts need it, whereas what we're doing is very, very niche. It's very specific. And I think technology, on the one hand, is going to save people time, but on the other hand, we're losing, we have more people retiring out than getting in. And for, I think, the same reason, forestry just isn't the most sexy or fast growing profession. I don't see a huge influx of young kids coming into it, not when they can be something more universalist like environmental scientists. I mean, heck, you've seen what the job market is these days. If I were a senior in college and I was thinking, am I going to put my hat into the forestry ring or into environmental engineering, and I had to think about paying off my student loans, forestry is a bit more of a risk in terms of it's just so hyper specific. So as you have the foresters that are aging out, I think the fact that there aren't a ton of people coming in might not be the death knell for forestry, because we are becoming more efficient. I think fewer people can do the work of the same amount of people in the past. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not unlike, say, logging. I mean, the logging industry, loggers are retiring, but logging is also getting way more productive. So you don't need as many loggers to do the same amount of work. So while we're struggling, filling seats, I think that it's almost a natural progression for the efficiency to get greater as the labor force starts to diminish. And I think we're going to maintain a pretty good balance there, but I don't see forestry growing in any leaps and bounds. I think that the carbon thing is certainly a bright spot, but I think ultimately we're dealing with an asset that I don't think people are ever going to fully value as much as the carbon market is trying to do that. So maybe I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer on that front, but I'm happy with where we are. I'm happy with the industry. I'm just not, I'm not optimistic that it's going to triple in size in the next decade.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And at times I wonder whether a professor should start their forestry 101 class with a Sprinter van in the background with a Starlink dish and a chair with behind the vineyard and say, hey, it's like this is what a digital forester is, and see people's eyes light up, the youngins there.
Yeah.
So as we're looking to wind down, and definitely enjoyed the conversation, totally cool, learning more about your story, and I love the focus where and to some extent it sounds like you need to be focused because you have those other duties and responsibilities with your other roles as a consulting forester. But thinking of the young folks out there, the young professionals, and maybe to take our conversation and spin it a different way. What advice would you give to them, or what I call the pro tips? If you had a younger Donn Downey here back in the day, still following the same trajectory in the path, thinking about your experiences to date, are there one or two or three life learnings that you would be like that you'd want to share and go like, man, if I knew this, then maybe not that you'd be not where you are, but maybe you'd be there sooner, or maybe you have more, or maybe you'd have that design build company still going as a third entrepreneur business going, the trifecta there. Any pro tips for the young digital forester professionals out there?
I think, I mean, I think there are two things that come to mind, and these are just, they're things that worked well for me. And I think they're pretty universally acceptable. I think one is, so right now, you know, the foresters are coming out of college, they're not sure what their future holds. The number of folks who are aging out of the profession is stunning. I mean, the rate at which consulting forestry firms are folding into other firms, somebody's retiring, looking to get rid of their clients. The rate at which that kind of management regime is changing is startling. And I think if anybody in that position in college is worried, all they need to do is introduce themselves to a couple foresters and they will get work. I think too often in this, because forestry is so tiny, you know, people are looking for jobs and they're going to go to, you know, U.S. Forest Service, they're going to go to Weyerhaeuser, they're going to go to Potlatch Delta, you know, they're going to just look at the big places and get nervous. But in reality, there's so much demand for boots on the ground forestry on the private side that's just harder to find. But if you show up at a meeting, if you show up at a workshop or an SAF meeting, if you're not involved in the student SAF chapter, that's where you're going to get that job. And the where I'm going with this is, if there was one piece of advice, it would be ask questions. Locate somebody with gray hair, ask them questions, introduce yourself, ingratiate yourself with them, because you're going to learn everything from that, from the old guard, and they are the key to helping you, you know, get to your future, really. You know, asking questions, be curious. It's how I've always managed to get where I am, is just by saying, I don't know this. Be happy that you don't know something and be willing to ask the question. And the question that often makes you feel dumb, but that's the question that needs to be asked, and the question that most people appreciate hearing.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Love it. Love it. And, you know, often things boil down to the simple things, you know, network, and, you know, be open-minded, you know, be curious, and love it. So, hey, I really appreciate you carving out some time to talk with me. It was great to see you, at least, maybe not in person, but it's definitely been probably well over 3 or 4 or even 5 years. I don't know, both you and I couldn't recollect or remember when the last time we shared a soda pop, but definitely appreciate your time. So for our listeners or our audience, you know, Donn mentioned he doesn't get that many support calls. So maybe we should try and generate an uptick in volume of calls or pings. So if folks want to get a hold of you, Donn, learn more about Forest Metrix Pro software, or your consulting forestry services, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Sure. Our website is forestmetrix.com, Forest Metrix with an X, and I can be reached at Donn with 2 N's at forestmetrix.com. And that's the easiest way to find us. And that's where you could download, download free trial and reach out and contact me. See all the great videos and help resources. And yeah, that's the easiest way to contact me, forestmetrix.com.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, again, appreciate you carving out some time. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. Wishing you all the best, and hopefully I'll see you somewhere on the event circuit soon.
2024 will be busy, I'm sure of it.
For sure. 100%. All
All
right, man.
right.
Great seeing you. Good chatting with you, and wishing you all the best.
Likewise, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Take care.